All right. So today I want to talk to you about attitude and the importance of attitudes, the importance of attitude, how to control your attitude, what attitude is, and why you should care. So I've read thousands of books over the years, and the very first book I read was Attitude 101 by John Maxwell. It was one of my mentors at the time gave me the book to read. It's a very small book, so I wasn't intimidated by that, and I began to read that book. And what it described to me was the importance of attitude, what attitude was, why successful people tend to have a more productive attitude than unsuccessful people, how your attitude tends to reflect how your attitude gives off a certain energy to the world, and that energy is reflected back to you from what you give out. So attitude gives you, it's kind of like a cause and effect relationship to your life. If you approach life with a good attitude, you have a better chance of having life reflect back to you good things. So it's that boomerang effect that you get from having a good attitude inside of you. In high school, I was known as having a negative attitude. I was more of a negative person who saw things from a negative point of view. That negative thinking that came from me was reflected in my disposition towards other people, towards my studies, towards myself, and towards my whole situation around me. So I didn't have the best environment or life or whatever at that time because of me. So when I got into personal development, it taught me that I am responsible for my attitude. And if I'm responsible, I can change my attitude. And as I change my attitude, my circumstances around me, the people, the things, my studies, my job, everything around me will change as a result of me changing. So that was very impactful for me. And I've carried that throughout my adult life now, from 23 or whatever it was when I started personal development, now to me being 36. And that one thing has had a huge impact on who I am as a person, how I show up, how I conduct myself today, how I approach people, how I approach studies, how I approach my job, life, everything. Attitude is everything. It's the foundation of success. It's a foundational personal development principle. It's a foundation for having a good life. It is a good, strong, positive attitude. So I got my book with me, one of my books with me, John Maxwell. This is 3 books in one, but the book we're going to focus on is The Winning Attitude. I wanted to pull out a couple of notes for you in here from what he says. Let's go to page 20. Page 20, he says, the attitude is an inward feeling expressed by behavior. That is why attitude can be seen without a word being said. Haven't we all noticed the pout of a sulker or the jutted jaw of the determined? Of all things we wear, our expression is the most important. The last part is the most important thing he said. Of all things we wear, our expression, he's talking about our physical expression, is the most important. And he says that because our physical expression is reflective of our inward expression. And our inward expression comes from how we feel about ourselves, like I was saying earlier, how we feel about ourselves, how we feel about what we're doing at that present time, all these type of things. Another good quote here. This is page 21. Sometimes the attitude can be masked outwardly, and others who see us are fooled. But usually the cover-ups will not last long. There is that constant struggle as the attitude tries to wiggle its way out. And he's talking about people who try to portray a different outward appearance than what their inner appearance actually says. And you can do this sometimes, but that's that the inner conflict he was talking about. Eventually, what's on the inside has to bubble up, has to show up on the outside. So that's why what's on the inside you have to be careful of. Another good point was on page 24. Oh, he says the same thing I just said. Soon, what is happening within us will affect what is happening without. A hardened attitude is a dreaded disease. It causes a closed mind and a dark future. When the attitude is positive and conducive to growth, the mind expands and the process begins. Attitude. What's the dictionary say about attitude? The definition is a settled way of thinking or feeling about someone or something, usually reflected in our behavior. So again, what's on the inside has to show up on the outside. Now, this is the most empowering part about attitude. You may be conditioned a certain way now, but that doesn't matter, because when you become aware that you are responsible for your attitude, you can recondition yourself to a new way of thinking. That is your responsibility as a mature, responsible adult. So you decide how you show. You put yourself in the driver's seat. You empower yourself when you decide how you're going to show up to a given situation, how you're going to treat people, how you're going to treat yourself, how you're going to talk to people, talk to yourself, and show up in whatever environment you're in. When you decide that, when you take command of that, now you are giving yourself the power back. Instead of what's outside of you controlling you, you control what's inside of you. So that's the difference. And that's why successful people tend to have great attitudes, because they are in the driver's seat of their lives. Their attitude puts them in the driver's seat of their lives. Everyone that I know that is chronically depressed, I'm not talking about temporarily, because everybody goes through ups and downs regardless of how positive you think you are, but somebody who's chronically depressed usually has a chronically depressed attitude or chronically negative way of approaching things in their environment and people, and that reflects back to them in the state we call depression. So also somebody who tends to be always optimistic and alive and full of energy and vigor and hope, that outward appearance is a reflection of their inner appearance, that inner attitude. So what I'm saying to you is that attitude is a fixed way of thinking on the inside that reflects on the outside to your outer world. And what is reflected on your outer world from your inner world tends to get reflected back to you from your environment. And that back and forth circle of circumstances I just described is what we call life. Life is how you are on the inside, how you perceive the outside, and the back and forth of those two. Let me give you a few more points that he says here. Our attitude determines our approach to life. Our attitude determines our relationships with people. Our attitude in the beginning of a task will affect the outcome more than anything else. And that is very important. Let me say it again. He says our attitude at the beginning of a task determines the outcome of that task more than any other factor. Now, this has helped me a lot. There's been several. Think about this. If you put me in the room with someone else and we go through the same situation, the same set of circumstances, I will respond to that different than that other person usually, because they have a different habitual attitude than me, a different habitual way of seeing things. I have conditioned myself to look for the positive in everything, to keep myself in control of the situation, keep myself in control of how I react to the situation. So I'm going to show up different than what that other person will, and I'll get a different outcome than this person in the same exact set of circumstances. That's the important point. How can two people approached with the same set of circumstances respond to them different? It comes from attitude. It's the habitual way of each person's way of perceiving a given set of circumstances. That's the difference. And we are in control of that. So that's what I'm trying to tell you. Always be in control of your attitude. Always think about how you're showing up. Always think about what I'm going to do to look at this in the most positive and productive way. All right, so what I'm trying to say to you is this. No matter what happens to you on the outside, you have to control your attitude on the inside. That will allow you to stay in control of the situation and not let the situation control you. That will allow you to respond to the situation in a productive manner. That will allow you to grow from the situation and take lessons, constructive, growth-oriented lessons from whatever situation you go through. That will allow you to be the leader in the situation. The leader is the one that always has a productive, optimistic orientation towards whatever happens. This person tends to be the leader that people look towards for advice and leadership and guidance in these situations. So just keep that in mind. It's very important to know that life will reflect back to you circumstances that mirror your internal circumstances. How you show up on the inside is going to be reflected by how you show up on the outside. So how do you develop a winning, successful, positive attitude? Well, it comes back to your environment. Input determines output. So you have to be mindful of what you're putting inside your mind, inside yourself. Because what you feed yourself is going to be reflected out by what you give out. If you put in negativity, negativity comes out. If you put in positive, encouraging, uplifting, optimistic words and music and books and people around you in your environment, that will reflect in your actions around you. It has no choice. There's no other way around it. That's why you have to be mindful of your environment. You have to be mindful of your mentors. You have to be mindful of your friends. You have to be mindful of even me and your mother. Your environment needs to be consistently positive, encouraging, uplifting, and affirming. That will be reflected in what you give out. And what you give out will largely determine the results you get in life. I can't stress how important that is enough. I just cannot overly state the importance of what I'm saying right now. Please take advantage of this. Read the book, The Winning Attitude by John Maxwell. And just be careful about your attitude and people's attitudes around you, because they tend to rub off on each other. I love you, son.